From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende. Ride shotgun next to me, as he does each and every podcast, is Andre Johnson
Jr.
That is correct. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review. If you are watching us on YouTube, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And today, another great episode today, back here on this Monday in the city of New Orleans. A big week in the sort of whole off-season calendar of the NFL and obviously the New Orleans Saints, who we're covering here with OTAs starting on Tuesday. But before we get into that, did you have a good weekend, Andre?
Yeah, it was a good weekend. You know, I went out to Baton Rouge, did this restaurant called the Supper Club.
Yeah, you talked
there.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good. You know, came back and a very underrated busy week for us. You know, you got the OTAs this week. You got a lot of baseball and softball going on across Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Hammond, America, all of the above. So, I mean, there's no shortage of things for us to do this week. For sure.
It is a busy week for me. Both my kids are graduating, one from kindergarten, one from fifth grade. So congratulations, Mila. Congratulations, Aspen. Daddy is proud, as I always am, of you too. So we are moving right along in this parenthood phase, my wife and I, with this. It's crazy. They say it goes by fast. It just does. It really, really, really goes by fast. Also got some work in the house where we're pulling up the carpet. So we had to paint 2 rooms this weekend. So we tag teamed that, knocked it out. Fantastic weekend, but I'm glad to be back this week. Okay, let's get to the topic at hand. I was at the Saints Hall of Fame golf tournament today. I am a member of the Saints Hall of Fame selection committee, and every year, this is not just because I'm a member of the selection committee, they have this Hall of Fame Classic. It's out in Kenner, out in Chateau. Former players, some current players, and coaches tend to go out there, play around of golf. It helps the Saints Hall of Fame Museum, and it's usually pretty light, pretty straightforward. It's usually in the month of May. I feel like I had to go back and check, but I feel like it was a little bit later this year than in years past. But nonetheless, it fell when it fell this year on this Monday. And usually it's pretty lighthearted, just kind of casual, keeping up with whatever the latest update was within the organization. But today, you know, we got quite a few interesting news nuggets from Mickey Loomis, from Dennis Allen, even from Cam Jordan about just some significant things happening within the organization and around the organization, or people that have to do with the organization. That's where I felt like it was a good place to start with the big picture, because this is one topic that we've talked about a lot, and it's really hard to get a gauge either way, but we got a significant update on Marshon Lattimore today.
Yep. Throughout the entire offseason, really from the moment the Saints ended the season in January, the most constant question around this team has revolved around the future of cornerback Marshon Lattimore. And today, Dennis Allen kind of gave us a bit of a glimpse into how the communication with Lattimore is going. And we're actually going to let you hear what he said right now.
I had a conversation with him probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. I thought it was a positive conversation. And so, we're moving forward.
All right, so it was short, it was sweet, but it was significant.
Yeah.
They spoke. They hadn't spoken in a while. And when we talked to them after the draft, 3 weeks ago, they hadn't spoken quite some time. Now they have. It was a positive conversation, and now they move forward. So, what do we think of this? Well, to me, it's, like I said, great that they talked, because it hadn't happened in quite some time. To me, it's business as usual, and it's one of those rare things where the news is there really is no news. It's just kind of go, and business as usual, and he's a Saint until he isn't, until otherwise notified. I mean, that's really the approach I've always taken with the Lattimore situation. It feels like the approach Lattimore is taking with the situation, even though we haven't spoken to him in a while. Clearly, the Saints hadn't up until recently, and it feels like that's the way the Saints are taking the Lattimore situation. People, as you mentioned, people have asked me a lot, will he be back? And my answer is always the same. I just honestly have never gotten a strong feeling either way when it comes to Marshon Lattimore's future in New Orleans. That were they ever really close to a deal? Did they ever have a deal in mind? We can't ignore the contract shift, the contract adjustment. But since then, it's really been pretty quiet in terms of we haven't heard any leaks about teams potentially interested, offers potentially interested, or offers that could be made with the Saints were looking for. And generally with a player of that magnitude, those little breadcrumbs kind of get leaked out, you know, at some point throughout this process. I think he adjusted that contract in the regular season of last year. So this has been quite some time. So it's kind of been that thing that's kind of been out there. I don't know if you call it hanging over the organization, or it's just kind of there within the organization. And I think, obviously, they made that adjustment just to give everyone the option, whether it was Lattimore's camp that wanted it, whether it was the Saints camp that wanted it, whatever the case may be. They just wanted to give themselves the option, and it has just stayed there. It has just stayed in that place where they could go this way and he's traded. They could go that way and he's not. But right now, there has been no move, so he's still with the organization. It feels like if there were tension, which you can maybe say just by reading between the lines that there could have been, maybe not. Perhaps that's starting to cool down a little bit. And that typically happens because the further you get away from a hot topic, the more time you have to kind of let things process, the more time you have to let things go and sleep on it and all that stuff. You just kind of put everything aside and you just move forward. And that feels like what the Saints are doing at this point. Of course, things could still change. Remember, that contract was set up to where a post-June 1st trade is the most fiscally responsible thing for the Saints to do. It makes it better for the Saints financially if they were to execute a post-June 1st trade. We're obviously right by June 1st, so it's getting closer and closer and closer. But to me, at this point, as I opened with, it's probably smart to just go with he's a Saint until he isn't. He's a Saint until otherwise notified. By the way, with Lattimore on this roster, hands down, the cornerback room is the best position group on the team right now.
It definitely is. And, I mean, you could argue that it was before the draft. And that's really why a lot of people have been asking those questions is that it seemed like for a while the Saints might have been preparing for a future without Marshon Lattimore. You know, you trade up to get a cornerback in Kool-Aid McKinstry, who you were obviously very high on. And even though you've got Marshon, Adebo, and Alante, which is a pretty solid DB room at the cornerback position, but you get Kool-Aid McKinstry anyway, and there were all of the little tidbits in press conferences about, oh, everyone's available, you know, let's see it. We'll see if we get an offer that we just can't refuse. And clearly that offer didn't come. You know, we did a podcast about 2 months or so ago.
We looked at those offers, Yeah,
and we said, you know, if you get a second from Marshon Lattimore, you got to jump at that. We thought about maybe 2/3 for Marshon Lattimore might be doable. But whatever the price tag the Saints have on Marshon, since they did say everyone's tradable, we assume everyone has a price tag, no matter how high that price tag is. Whatever the price tag is for Lattimore, nobody met it. That's what it really comes down to, because they said everyone is available, which means Marshon, with the right offer, would have been available. That offer didn't come. Marshon and DA and the team have now spoken for the first time in what you can assume has maybe been a while. He said, we're moving forward with Marshon, and this is kind of what you alluded to when we did talk about Marshon a few months ago, is if you're going to trade Marshon, the time to do it was before the draft. Now that you're talking after the draft, a lot more uncertainty kind of comes with moving a player of that caliber who, let's not get it twisted, is, when healthy, one of the best cornerbacks in the league. So that big offer that the Saints would have moved Lattimore for clearly never came. So now they're moving forward.
And I would love to know if, you know, how close they've come, how many calls they've really, you know, fielded from other teams. What is his desirability on the open market? Because as much as we know Marshon Lattimore is a certain player, if you're not within this organization, you're on the outside looking in. You're looking at a player that was once great, but now has 2 back-to-back seasons of significant injury issues for a guy that was probably about 27, 28, 29 years old, somewhere in that range. So not a young player, but not an old player. So all these factors play in. They gave themselves the option. Looks like that option has yet to materialize. Things can change, though. Things can change very quickly. Someone could get injured. There could be a falling out. Who knows? I got to tell you this, though. I'm really curious to look at the attendance at OTAs tomorrow, and if Lattimore is one of the ones in attendance. I don't know. I don't think he was in attendance last year. So it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if he missed. But be very curious if he's healthy enough and back, ready to go at OTAs. That'd be something to really keep our eye on. Maybe one of the few things one of the many things I'll look at OTAs tomorrow. But the Marshon Lattimore, he's still a Saint. And like I said, the news is there really is no news. He's just everyone goes on with business as usual with right now Marshon Lattimore being a member of the New Orleans Saints.
Right, and now we go from a guy who's still a Saint to a guy who is no longer a New Orleans Saint, but still an interesting tidbit came about him today, and that would be former Saints offensive lineman Andrus Peat. Now, in talking to General Manager Mickey Loomis said that the Saints actually did make an attempt to re-sign Andrus Peat because for months, all really before the draft, since the draft, everybody's been like, hey, Andrus Peat's still out there. He's familiar with the Saints system. The Saints should really bring that guy back. Turns out they tried, and despite that, Andrus Peat said no and wound up going to sign with the Las Vegas Raiders. So that kind of does fill in a blank of, what's been the holdup between the Saints and Andrus Peat. The interest was there from the Saints side, but for whatever reason, whether it was price tag, fit, team wanting something new, Andrus Peat decided to go to Vegas.
Andrus is a good example. We made attempts to get him re-signed, and he chose to go someplace else, which that's what free agency is about. And look, Andrus was a good pick for us and played for us for a long time. Excited for him. I know he's got a new chapter. He's probably excited about a new team, and wish him nothing but the best of luck.
Yeah, this was an interesting development or an interesting nugget of information. This is what I was talking about, because this is something none of us would have even cared to even ask Mickey about. But it was for instance, when it came to Andrus Peat about, trying to get things back under, the correct salary cap. I think it was Mike Triplett that asked the question. Get the correct, get your salary cap under control. So maybe staying away from a guy like Andrus Peat, even though he looks like he'd be a nice sort of safety net or cushion, given the teams needed the position. You don't want to necessarily overpay for an older player. And Mickey kind of veered off and said, no. We offered Andrus Peat. We wanted him to come back and re-sign with the Saints, but he chose to sign elsewhere. This is just like you said, it fills in the blanks, because it turns out all the chatter we did on this podcast about Andrus Peat, man, if only there was an offensive lineman that had a connection to the organization that was available right now, given the massive hole along the offensive line, if the Saints could sign. Well, it turns out they did want to sign him. They did want to bring him back. But so we were all pretty dead on when it came to, wow, it seems like this would have been an obvious one for the Saints to bring back Andrus Peat. Must be something different that's happening, or behind the scenes. Maybe we thought the new coaching staff wasn't a fan. I never really put Andrus Peat into the equation of, I just don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to the Saints. But look, it was obvious to all of us that he was a fit to bring back because of the hole up front at a couple of positions. And so did the Saints. And so they weren't crazy. We weren't crazy. The Saints offered, but Peat said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to Las Vegas. I am good. My question is simply this. When was this offer? Okay. Was it early in free agency, later in free agency, after the James Hurst retirement? And how much, they've been doing a lot of one-year deals this free agency, even with their own guys they were bringing back. So was it a fairly, veteran minimum-ish type deal to bring back? And was it just a situation where he got so much more money with the Raiders, or he just wanted to change the scenery? Look, he's had a pretty interesting career arc with the Saints, Andrus Peat, from a first-round pick in 2015 that really no one saw coming. It was a weird development when he got picked back in 2015, and it just feels like after 9 seasons, he's just done with New Orleans. You know what? That's fine. He's had an interesting career, like we said. He went early in his career, he couldn't quite find the right position. They had him at right tackle, they had him at left tackle, they had him at right guard. Finally settled in at that left guard position. Often injured, then was often scapegoated because he was often injured. Wasn't always viewed as the toughest guy. Wasn't always viewed as just that nasty, mauling type. Always felt like had an unfair reputation of being a bit soft, to all of a sudden being somewhat of a savior last year, to now fans like, whoa, bring Andrus Peat back, bring Andrus Peat back, bring Andrus Peat back. So it's been an interesting kind of roller coaster career arc in New Orleans. And look, remember, he took basically a pay cut to return to the Saints last season and ended up losing his job, then getting his job back at left guard, then shifted positions to left tackle. And like I said, kind of saved the season up front along the offensive line when Trevor Penning got benched. He's done in New Orleans. Saints wish him well. Andrus, look, you did your time. go to Las Vegas, finish off the last little bit of your career, whatever you have left with the Raiders. Hopefully you get some success. But I'm just glad we weren't crazy. I'm just glad
Exactly.
we weren't crazy. Like, we were thinking it. It was so obvious. The Saints were thinking it too. But it turns out the ball was in Andrus's court, and he took his ball, and he went to Las Vegas.
Exactly. And when Andrus was here, if we want to be honest about it, you kind of alluded to it. It's not like he was a fan favorite.
Right.
There were a lot of New Orleans Saints fans who weren't exactly the highest on Andrus Peat. And when we heard that Andrus Peat had the offer from the Saints and decided to go to Vegas anyway, it just felt like a change of scenery. Maybe a fresh start for a guy who still has some years in his career ahead of him. Are the Raiders a better team? I don't think so. Maybe some of the black and silver would say they're better than the black and gold, but I don't think they're a better team. But they do have a young head coach in Antonio Pierce who's establishing a culture in Vegas. He's a big players coach. The locker room really rallied behind him when he stepped in for Josh McDaniels last season.
Did they ever?
So maybe, Andrus Peat sees kind of the budding of that flower per se, and he wants to be a part of it. Fresh start in Vegas. Like the Saints did. I'll wish him well. We'll see how that goes. But the guy who will be taking his place, we got another interesting tidbit about Lucas Patrick, the guy who you could kind of pencil in at left guard right now, talking to Dennis Allen.
Yeah.
He said that in the process of getting Lucas Patrick here, he talked to rookie defensive end, or I guess you could say second-year defensive end now.
Defensive tackle.
Defensive tackle. Brian Bresee.
Yeah.
And he asked Brian Bresee what he thought about Lucas Patrick because the two had faced off previously last season. And Brian Bresee said that Lucas Patrick was the toughest offensive lineman that he had played all season. Now, DA went on to say later on that, look, whether Bresee said what he said or not, we were probably going to sign Lucas Patrick anyway, but getting that stamp of approval from a young player, a lot of times when you're making free agency decisions, you talk to your veterans. This is a guy who was a first-round rookie last year, so getting that stamp of approval from a guy who clearly they hold in pretty high regard, I'm sure played some part in the Saints bringing in Lucas Patrick.
Yeah, I was the one that asked the question to Dennis Allen. It was a pretty generic question. I just wanted an update on Lucas Patrick because he was the most recently signed guy. He's going to play a significant role. I think he's the guy you pencil in at left guard. And so, what stood out about him? What attracted you guys to bring him aboard? And much like Mickey with the Andrus Peat situation, DA kind of threw a little curveball. I said, well, it was actually a conversation with Brian Bresee. And my first thought was, well, they didn't play each other in college. I mean, Brian Bresee's quite a bit younger than Lucas Patrick. There's no way they faced off in college. And then he kept going and going. And he said last year when they played the Bears, I believe, he said Bresee told him that Lucas Patrick was the toughest offensive lineman he had faced all season. He said that's what they saw on tape. And then, that piqued a lot of reporters' interest. It's like, whoa. So you guys have conversations like that with a player like Brian Bresee? And I think and one reporter asked, well, what does that say about Brian Bresee? He's just only 1 year in the league. You're asking his opinion on veterans like that. And I think he wanted to make it seem like Brian Bresee wasn't the guy that sold them on Lucas Patrick, but I do think it was a fair part of the process for him to bring that up unsolicited. I would have never known about Brian Bresee's conversation with Dennis Allen had he not brought it up, but I thought it was significant enough for him to bring up. And it's all good things. I mean, this is what happens in the NFL when you talk about free agency and what you're going to do. I mean, of course you talk to players. Of course you talk to coaches about how this person is, whether you played against them, whether you played with them. And I think it's even more appealing the fact that it was someone that Lucas Patrick went against, not played with, because they went toe-to-toe every single snap, but a lot of the snaps in that Bears game, and he was pretty adamant of how tough Patrick was, and I stand by my original thought with Lucas Patrick. He, to me, is your day one left guard starter for the New Orleans Saints offensive line. I think he stabilizes everything and really brings some competency and ups sort of the floor, if you will, for that Saints offensive line. So I thought it was an interesting nugget because, again, I wasn't expecting that. We would have never known that, but DA thought it was interesting, thought it was appropriate to volunteer that information. And I thought it was, like I said, it was just a good nugget of information that you don't normally get at that thing, but that's why you always have to go to these things because you just never know what you might find out.
Yep, and, if you're telling me, the coach has talked to a player on the defense trying to get an opinion on another player. You got so many veterans. You got Cam on the defense. You got DeMario, Carl Granderson, the Honey Badger, or even Colin Saunders if you want to go with another defensive tackle. But, to talk to Brian Bresee, obviously it has a lot to do with the fact that Brian Bresee actually head-to-head matched up with Lucas Patrick on many of the reps in that game. But it also shows you're not asking a guy a question who you don't trust.
Right, exactly.
It shows that there is a certain amount of trust and confidence in Brian Bresee's level of play and his opinion. And for a first-round draft pick last year, I think that's a good sign for the Saints. And I think it's just, they're doing their due diligence on a guy who I agree with you is going to play a big role on that offensive line, because pre-Lucas Patrick, we were talking about maybe Ali Udo, a career backup, stepping into that spot. Nick Saldivari, who was a healthy scratch from pretty much every game last season. So not a lot of experience starting at that position and being in the trenches every game. You didn't really have that before Lucas Patrick comes in. So now you bring in a guy like Lucas Patrick, a veteran like Lucas Patrick, when you've got young guys, different positions, playing the tackles, and Trevor Penning and Taliese Fuaga, but you have a veteran in that room now who can help them out in certain ways. So it just confirms that, we already like the Lucas Patrick signing, but knowing that Brian Bresee, a player who the Saints clearly have confidence in, also vouch for Lucas Patrick, it should make Saints fans feel a little better.
Yeah. And look, that's their biggest weakness. It's their biggest unknown. It's the biggest thing that has to come together, that not even the coaches have a good idea of what they have right now. So they get that kind of vote of confidence from a young player, and having the confidence in that young player to give you the vote of confidence. To me, I think it's a nice little development within the Saints organization where there's been, it's been somewhat low-key this offseason. So I do think that's certainly noteworthy to point out. All right, we got a big week this week. I'm going to be out at OTAs tomorrow. First OTA number 1. This is the first chance the entire team can get on the field together. We saw rookie minicamp. Now we get the entire team out there. We'll see how many players show up. Another little bit of information we got. Cam Jordan said, I guess this is with the offseason conditioning program. Not on the field yet. You can do weightlifting, I guess some sprints or whatever at the facility. He said right now it's about 90% attendance. So I hope those numbers translate on the field. They have a few guys that can't go because of injuries that Cam wouldn't say, but it certainly feels like he's going to be taking some baby steps in the OTAs. They said he's still rehabbing, which is something that's probably a little foreign to him. He's been so durable throughout his career, but I think eventually he'll get on the field, do some on-field stuff. But it's always an exciting time to get your first look at the new version of the New Orleans Saints. So it should be a big week up ahead. And then tomorrow we'll be back. We'll have a Wednesday podcast as well, but tomorrow we're going to do a pod as well, just off of OTA number 1. I just feel like it's too big of a topic to ignore. So we'll have another overtime podcast tomorrow around this time as well.
Definitely. And I'm excited, to see, because we saw the rookies already. We were interested in seeing the rookies. Now you get, pretty much the whole team. If it's 90%, as Cam said, it's a really exciting thing just to get everybody back out there and see everybody, see how the people are moving, see how some of the new acquisitions are. We haven't seen a Willie Gay Jr. yet. It'll be the first time we see a Lucas Patrick out there.
Cedric Wilson, or the wide receiver.
Yeah, a lot of the wide receivers. Equidemia St. Brown's going to be out there, and it'll be the first glimpse we get at the battle that the both of us think will probably be the battle of the summer.
Talk to him.
Which will be that QB2 battle between Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler. A lot of fans high on Spencer Rattler right now because of the excitement, because he was recently drafted, but don't be surprised if Jake Haener gets out there and reminds everybody why he was training camp MVP last year.
Yeah, I agree. And it's all fun. I just want to see the spirit and competitiveness amp up a little bit. I don't want to see that staleness that kind of hung over the organization a little bit mid-season last year. It was a little bit of a funk. I want them to get out of that. It's a new season. There's new optimism. There's fresh ideas in the building. There's a good young offensive coach to really be excited about. I want to see how the mixing and matching goes up front. I know it's going to change quite a bit, regardless from this week to next week and into training camp, all that stuff. But that's why it's always good this time of year. A, you start to see things kind of line up, and B, you generally catch those guys a little more relaxed, a little bit more personable. Like today, for instance, we got a lot of information today because the guard's down a little bit, so it's good for our purposes just to be out there and just see what's up. with the 2024 New Orleans Saints. So a big week up ahead. Anything else for us?
Oh, we're good.
All right. He's good. I'm good. That's Andre Johnson Jr. I am Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.